You're listening to No Plot, Only Lore, a podcast about games and the tables we play them at. Your DMs tonight and every night are Josh and Chris. You can find us on all podcast platforms or check us out at noplotonlylore.com. If you like what you hear today, please rate and review the show and share it with everyone you've ever met. Welcome back to No Plot Only Lore, the internet's most reductive D&D podcast. We are going to take a page from everyone else on the internet and just start reading content from Reddit wholesale.
That's how you make money in this industry. You just steal your content from Reddit and then repost it like it's your own.
Yeah, it's called crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
No, actually, that's only partially true. We are going to read something from Reddit today, but the reason we wanted to talk about it is because we feel that the issue that was brought up on the D&D subreddit really speaks to something that we wanted to have a conversation about in the first place when it comes to table expectations and communication. But the post itself is from a user named Lower Caregiver 2410, and they had a strange experience with their new group. So I'm just going to read you the story off the top here, and then we'll kind of give some reactions to it before getting some updates and getting into more detail. So the post says that the DM made my character, quote, the werewolf all along, end quote. I did not know. What can I do? I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for about a year now with my friend who is the DM and part of his group of friends. I play as a rogue, the others are a monk, bard, ranger, wizard, and a barbarian. We started in a village where there's a werewolf problem. Our task is to find out who the wolves are and eliminate them before all the villagers kill each other out of suspicion. We thought it was a nice plot twist when the DM told us that one of the werewolves was closer than we thought. At first we thought it was one of the NPCs who helped us in the quest, or maybe even the one who gave the quest. It was also fun when we found out that one of the players was secretly a werewolf. We all assumed that one of us had agreed to that with the DM from the beginning, so now it was just a G who made the most mistakes or killed the fewest werewolves, we thought. But no, yesterday we all found out that I was the secret werewolf. In fact, that I had also caused the most civilian victims in the meantime. Where the other players were given the choice, do you want to kill her or not, I was given the choice, do you kill the rest of the villagers or not? The session was ended quickly after that. I protested because I didn't know this. The DM had even edited part of my backstory. Is that even allowed? Some of the others also thought it was strange and wanted to let my character live. The others thought it was fun like this, and I could, quote, easily create a new character, end quote. What should I do now? We stopped right before the fight between the other players and me, along with some other werewolves. But I actually really don't like this, and the DM doesn't want to change it. Is this a normal thing to do? I don't really know what to think or do about it, and why the DM did this. I feel a bit insecure now. I wonder if it might be because he preferred a paladin instead of a rogue. He said that this was not the case when I asked him this, but why else is he doing this? At the beginning, he asked me several times if I really didn't want to play a paladin. Edit. There was no sign in advance that anything was quote-unquote wrong with my character. No strange nights, blood, or unexplained things. Could hold silver just fine and took normal damage to everything. So, nothing, and suddenly I'm a werewolf and I've committed 15 murders on the current location. So far, he also changed the whole reason I went on a quest and came into this group, and is keeping a lot of details about that secret as well. Like at first I left in order to find something for someone else, but now I was banished from my hometown because I had committed a few murders there as a werewolf. I don't know how and when I became one, also don't know who I killed in my hometown. The intention of this, quote, normal campaign, end quote, was to play this as an intro and then continue from level 5 into the quote-unquote real campaign. We are all now level 4. I'm playing an elf soul knife rogue.
All
so,
right.
Chris,
Yeah.
Initial feelings.
So much anger. There are so many problems with this, speaking as both a DM and as somebody who likes to play. Like, a lot of this seems like new DM stuff right up until you get to the point where the DM is like editing backstory in order to like support this idea and like completely getting rid of player agency in the whole ordeal. Um, there's so much wrong with what is happening in this scenario. And like caveat, obviously this is only coming from like one person's point of view. We don't have the other people here to defend themselves. So we're just kind of taking this at face value. But like, if this was my table, it wouldn't be my table for long.
Right. Yeah. As a player?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, a DM has occasionally surprised me with something that I had not built into my character, and I'm usually okay rolling with those sorts of punches, but you don't get to change my character's backstory. Right? That's mine.
Right.
I built that.
Right.
Right. You don't get to make arbitrary choices about who my character has been and who my character will be in the future without there being a discussion about that.
Right. Yeah, I will say it seemed very apparent to me right off the bat that this is a DM who has experience, but also like maybe just some like ineptitude when it comes to DMing. It seems like this is a person who's had campaigns run before and had like what they thought were super cool story ideas, but they just didn't pan out with those different groups. Right. And so now he's resorting to like forcing it to happen because they want to hit particular story beats. And like we've said it before, just write a book, dude.
Just write
a
book.
If that's what you want to do, just write a book.
Write a story. I mean, go on royal roads.
They've forgotten that the characters in their story are characters that they don't control. They are played by other people. So, you know, they're not just an NPC that you get to direct.
Well, and like, I feel like there is sometimes a fundamental misunderstanding of what the DM's role in a role-playing game is. Right? Because like a lot of times we talk about like, the DM is the storyteller. The DM is like telling the story and comes up with the plot. But that's almost never actually true.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're there to facilitate a story. You're not there to tell a story. You are there to be the backdrop. You are the set designer. You are the choir. You're the person who is playing all of the extras and doing like 500 costume changes so that the main characters can do their thing and tell their story. And so it feels a lot like this person had an idea for a story that they wanted to tell and possibly, like not to get into spoiler territory for the second post here, but like another player had a story that they wanted to tell and they're doing that at the expense of one of their players. And that's just super not cool.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is, like, you know, as a DM, your job is to set the initial overall tone and arc of the story with your hooks and maybe tease and reveal things along the way, but you really are taking a backseat to the players after that. So since you already kind of touched on it, why don't we get into the update?
I just want to talk about one other thing before we jump into the update, and that's the secondary role that you have is that you're an arbiter, right? Like you're the person who's there to enforce
adjudicate
fairness.
Mechanics.
Yeah, right. Like the mechanics are yours to adjudicate, and if you're not doing that in a way that is like fair and equal and even, you're going to lose a lot of trust from your players.
Right.
So, let's hop into that update.
And so update. Long story short, the Ranger knew about it. It was a plan to get rid of the Rogue. So I left the table. Barbarian did the same. The long story, so I had written down all the things I wanted to ask or say, and thanks to all of you who gave me a list of options and possible compromises, so I thought I was completely prepared.
That's such a great idea.
I first gave...
Sorry to interrupt, but like coming to the table with like a written list of the points that you want to hit when you're trying to communicate something. It's fantastic communication. well done.
Well, we have flipped from role playing to conflict resolution.
Yeah.
As an adult.
Yeah.
So I first gave that talk, which you recommended, about how I thought it was a nice idea, but that the execution was unpleasant for me. Because this way I couldn't play my character the way I expected. That I didn't feel completely comfortable with how my backstory was suddenly different, and I'm not sure how to play the character without knowing her background. And I said that I hope for a different choice, besides the, quote, kill the party or be killed by them, unquote. So, to get an idea we could all agree with, I wanted to start with 2 questions. 1, when did you decide that my character is a werewolf? And 2, can we go through what you now have as my backstory? After I did that whole speech, the DM started to give some strange excuses and stories about how he had this plan for a while, but each time he didn't know how to approach it in the campaign, until he talked to Ranger about it, and he gave this idea. The Ranger took over and told me that this way it would suit his backstory and get me to have, quote, a spectacular ending, unquote, as that character.
Again.
This got... yes. This got the barbarian mad, saying things like, so it was not planned, you singled her out and lied about it, and why the hell do you want to get rid of her that bad? What's wrong with you? The DM turned red and said, well, don't be so angry and let us finish. She did. The DM and Ranger both explained that in their previous campaign they had an annoying rogue, who always wanted to be the center of attention and often got the party into trouble. DM assumed that I'm not like that, so when I first indicated that I wanted to play a rogue, he agreed. But after he talked about it with the Ranger and Wizard, they started to doubt whether they wanted a rogue in the party after all. So that's where the whole, quote, why not play a paladin, unquote, came from before we started. I was certainly not as annoying in the game as the previous rogue, they admitted that, but Ranger and DM still didn't enjoy playing with a rogue. Because they got annoyed by the rogue traits. They found it annoying that I often looted the defeated enemies and was often the one who opened the most chests, but I thought that's normal for rogues. Like, I'm the one that picks the locks, and most of what I found I would also share with all of them, but okay, I let them talk. So, much later in the campaign, they came up with a plan. The whole werewolves plot twist, so that my character died. And I would have to make another one, after DM would say that I was not allowed to choose a rogue again. Because after everything, the party now no longer trusts any rogues in the game, quote unquote. Before that plan was made, the daughter of the person who gave us the quest was the werewolf all along. That's why there were no hints or clues that it was me, because it wasn't decided until the last minute. And they had hoped that I would not ask questions like I was doing now. After this whole speech from their side, I really didn't know what to say anymore. I was pissed that they had really targeted me and my character and said that I had been lied to. Sad that I had been lied to. If they had just said, hey, it looks like you want to play a rogue, but we prefer not to have one in the party after the annoying player last time, I would have just chosen something else. It wouldn't have been a problem, and this never would have happened. So I left the table, and after some shouting, the barbarian did too. The wizard later sent me a message saying he was sorry this all happened. He knew they were planning something, but didn't know it was this. The DM sent me a message asking if I would reconsider. The barbarian got the same. I sent him, quote, next time write a book.
Yup.
The bard doesn't know what to do, kind of wants to leave since we're gone, but at the same time really likes Dungeons & Dragons. So he fears he'd regret leaving after not even really playing. The monk and ranger have been very silent. So it's not in here, but there was a later update that said that at this point now, 4 players, the rogue, monk, ranger, rogue, monk, barbarian, and bard have all left that group and have now formed their own group that is going to run 4 different one-shots run by each of the different players, and then eventually they'll decide what they're all comfortable with and want to give further time to and go from there.
Which absolutely makes sense. That is, I think, the right play.
Yeah.
Here. Like, we'll get into, like, all of the reasoning and stuff for it, but, like, the lack of communication from the Dungeon Master and the reaction to attempts for better communication from the Dungeon Master and the Ranger are pretty strongly indicative that that is a table that is not going to last very long. Like,
no. So there's a phenomenon that I've seen before. I don't really put a name on it, but you could kind of call it like toxic table syndrome. And what happens is that you will get a small group within the larger group that have played before several times together and develop sort of their like own internal meta and logic that they want to adhere to and bring that from game to game, but don't communicate any of that to the new players and put unspoken weird expectations and rules on the table without telling anyone.
Like how dare
And
you play
just
a rogue because somebody else was annoying.
yeah, there was another rogue existed and that rogue was annoying, therefore no rogues. Like, what?
That's so gross.
So yeah, like this, like right now I can see the DM and the ranger, and to a lesser extent, but I think they're still culpable, the wizard will continue to try to bring people into their group and then like self-destruct.
Yeah.
Like they are going to sabotage that group every time new people come in because they don't have those people bought into the whatever weirdness has existed before that they want to, for whatever reason, perpetuate.
Yeah. All right. So there's two ways that I want to talk about how this could have been done differently. The first is I want to talk about like the communication on the table, right? Like the meta game of the thing. And the second that I want to go over is like, how would you do this in a way that didn't suck?
Yeah.
Like if you were the DM,
so like,
what situation would you do to have your character become a werewolf in a way that didn't rob your player of their agency?
yeah, so I guess like the first idea being, how can we set up a table that doesn't require you secretly like undermining one of your players for quote unquote narrative purposes? And then the other way is like, okay, if you want to do this weird narrative trick, how do you make that happen without pissing everyone off?
Right.
Okay, so let's start with setting up a proper table.
Yeah. So I guess like the first thing that kind of has to happen for setting up a proper table is like you need to be willing to communicate, right? Like everything else kind of goes out the window unless you are willing to communicate and communicate honestly with the people who are going to be on your table, right? Like you can't get onto a table and have expectations about what's going to happen and then not communicate those expectations but still expect those expectations to be met, right? You need to be willing to communicate. And there's a few different things, like a few different tools that you can use for that. Like I like to practice building trust with my players through very open and honest communication. I try and foster as much understanding as I can between myself and my players. There's a lot of really great communication tools out there that you can get for like conflict resolution and like relationship management that are also very applicable to a role-playing game table. So for instance, one of my favorites is it's a type of communication called nonviolent communication that involves a lot of like saying back to the person the thing that you understand that they are saying, right? So that you can clarify and make sure that you do understand the thing that they're saying. And like speaking for yourself, but not speaking for anybody else, right? Using a lot of like I statements to make sure that you're not like speaking over somebody or speaking for somebody. And I feel like those two things combined, right? Like building the trust and creating better understanding lead to you having a more nurturing environment for creativity and also building the empathy that you need to be able to meet your players where they are.
Right. So I would say one other thing to keep in mind is that like, we're talking about open and honest communication, but something that you need to understand and embrace as a dungeon master are qualities of leadership. And leadership requires a lot of accountability. And frankly, when it comes to communication and leadership, it requires proactive communication. It's one thing to sit there at the table and say, hey, I just want everyone to know this is like a totally safe space and it's open for us to talk about anything. If you have any issues with stuff that comes up, please just talk to me. If you're unhappy with the way the game's progressing, or if you don't feel like you're being included, please come talk to me. Let's just keep the lines of communication open. This is your table too. I want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. That's great. No one's going to talk to you because you are in a position, whether you realize it or not, of authority. And human beings, for the most part, are deferential to authority. And a player who's uncomfortable is likely to swallow as much as they can and then just disappear on you.
I think that really depends on the player, though.
It does depend on the player, but I'm saying the majority of people do not have that comfortability with not conflict, but like there is a certain amount of natural conflict that comes when you need to bring something up that you're unhappy with. But if you as the DM are the one starting that conversation saying, hey, how are you feeling about this? How do you feel about this? I've noticed that there's been like a lack of participation in the role play side of like X, Y, and Z part of this adventure. Like you need to be looking for and bringing up issues that could potentially arise, even if it's just to get people to say, no, we're fine, I was just tired that day or whatever, right? Putting the onus on your players to bring all of their issues to you is not going to prevent conflicts by saying you're open. Like, open door policies don't mean anything if you stay within that office. You have to like come out to meet the people where they're at and start that conversation on your own and be vulnerable in that way.
Well, like you can't expect people to self-advocate unless you're willing to advocate for them, right? Like,
right.
You reaching out and actually starting those conversations is you letting your player know that their needs, their wants, what they're looking for from the game have importance to you, right? That you are actually actively seeking that feedback as well as passively seeking that feedback, right? Because you can be passive all day about getting feedback, but nobody's going to fill out your survey, right? Like, that just isn't going to happen.
Yep.
Where if you actually go and meet people where they're at and you do encourage them to give you feedback, good and bad, right? Things that you want to see differently, things that you want to explore next session, right? Like, all of that is so important for building that trust with your players.
Yeah, like something that anyone who's got any brains about them working in customer feedback roles will tell you is that putting out feedback surveys just gives you feedback on the kind of people who are likely to fill out a survey. You have to be metaphorically or even physically knocking on doors and starting those conversations with people to get feedback from everybody. There's a certain percentage of the population that are complainers. They like to let you know what you're doing wrong. That's great. You need feedback from those people too, but
I feel like
there's a lot of people
who that, Josh.
There's a lot of people who just say, well, they should know better and don't give you real feedback until you go and get it from them. And then you say, hey, like, we noticed, you missed more sessions than normal. Is everything okay? Is there something going on? And sometimes it's nothing. And like, oh, I've just been really swamped at work or sick or whatever. And then other times it's like, hey, like, I think D&D might not be for me or whatever, like, but you have to start that conversation to be able to address something if there's, an actual root to the problem. If let's say it's like an interpersonal conflict, like, you're never going to know if one person just drops off the face of the planet and the other person's like, well, I don't know what happened. And it turns out like they were secretly bullying them the whole time or whatever.
Well, like, yeah, I like to do that after a session is done. And usually I'll give my players a bit of time to digest whatever just happened. Because, like, as an engaging activity, Dungeons & Dragons does have a tendency to create a bit of mental exhaustion over the course of play. So, like, giving your players a bit of time to, like, actually digest and have a chance to reflect and like see how they feel about various things that happen in the session is important. So like myself, my whole crew is on a Discord channel. Right? Like we have a Discord that we use for like arranging games and talking about the games and stuff. And so like if I need feedback from people, that's where I go. Right? After a couple of days, I'll just send somebody a quick text being like, "Hey, here's a thing about our game. Just checking in with you." Whatever. Right? So, but
Yeah, definitely.
like any time between your sessions is fine for those. I wouldn't necessarily do it like right after a session because you're still not going to get any of that feedback. And I wouldn't necessarily
No,
do it
and
before a session either because that's going to like bring up feelings.
yeah, like you don't want to be starting off your night with like, hey, let's like get everyone on edge by bringing up all the conflict, and then okay, time to deal with the werewolf.
Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah, kind of.
I've definitely had it like the recap, right when we were doing a recap of a thing. Recapping the previous session set somebody off, and they ended up yelling at the rest of the table. I was just a player at that one. I wasn't DMing, but
I had one where a girl was basically like, "Hey, I thought I would give D&D a try, but I'm not having a great time, so tonight's going to be my last night." And I was like, what?
I didn't plan on killing your character, but let me see what I can do.
Yeah. So let's talk about then, like, so we've said how not to start the night, but like maybe let's talk about further back, like how do we start the whole shebang? Like
Session zeros.
How do we set up? Yeah, like we talked about communication, but we need to create a space that fosters communication and openness. So that starts before you've even cracked a book to make a character. So session zero, what does it mean? What can it be? And what shouldn't it be?
So session zero for me, and I mean, this is going to be different for every group and every person, but session zero for me is an opportunity to discuss our expectations of the game. Right? It's a place for us to lay down the rules of engagement. What things are going to be okay? What things are not going to be okay? What kind of plot lines are you looking at working with over the course of however long we're going to be playing this game? What kind of plot lines do you absolutely not want to do? Right? Because there are definitely story points and story beats that people are tired of or people find uncomfortable, and you want to avoid those if you can. So like working those into your plan from session zero is great. And then like establishing what people are going to be okay with as far as like content is concerned, right? So like having agreements about, is there going to be any kind of sexuality in this game? Right? Like, are we going to have sexual situations that happen in this game, and is everybody cool with that? How do we feel about ultra violence? How do we feel about violence against specific groups? Right? Like I know for myself, one of my hard lines is I don't want to play in situations that involve graphic violence with children. I'm a father. That shit triggers me. Right? Like it makes me deeply uncomfortable, and I have to leave. So like that is what session zero is for. As for like how you do it, there's a bunch of different ways that you can go about that. So I know that for myself, I didn't actually do a session zero with my current group. We kind of like did a bunch of smaller aside meetings because we were just trying to like set up something at our work, and I was pretty sure that it was just going to be like a one-off session, so I didn't want to spend that entire one-off doing like session zero stuff. It turned out to be like an actual campaign, so that's been nice. But yeah, like we didn't actually do a session zero, but we did a bunch of like discussions behind the scenes and like getting things set up for that, figuring out what everybody was comfortable with. And there was actually a flub with this one too, because I did include a brief description of a sexual situation where I had not already gotten consent from everybody for that. And so I had to like write an apology, and I did write an apology, and then check in with everybody about how we felt about that. So That's kind of how I've been. Like that's how I ran them for this game. Normally, I would prefer to have like an actual sit down session, both with the entire group and with each of my players. But it's really going to depend on your time constraints.
Yeah, I mean, so my experience has been slightly different. I have run a lot of campaigns with like brand new first time players that were just have never touched an RPG before. So a lot of our session zero comes down to like, hey, what is an RPG? Like, how do you play it? But you know, at the same time, I do talk about what I expect from them as players and their buy-in level. You know, sort of germane to the point about this, about rogues, I mean, I have had the conversation before where I said, look, I understand you're a naturally, you know, chaotically inclined person and you're playing a class that facilitates that to a certain degree, but you have to understand that, you know, you are going to tread on other people's toes if you're only thinking about what's interesting for yourself. And so, you know, setting some boundaries off the start, like, hey, if I find that you are, you know, overstepping other people's boundaries and sort of making the show about you, you're going to find that I'm pushing back more and giving a lot more just like, nope.
Well, that's
you know?
that's so important too, is like finding where your character is going to groove with the rest of the party. Like,
yeah,
not just like the rogue thing, but also your evil characters. Right? You've always got that one motherfucker
right,
that wants to be a super edgelord and is going to play a lawful evil or chaotic evil character. And like,
yep,
that's great. There's ways that you can run that, but then you have to sit back and go, why? Why do you want to be this type of character? And is that going to gel with what's going on with this table? And if it doesn't gel with what's going on with this table, it's a cool concept, but maybe it isn't for this specific game, right? Pocket that one, you'll use it for a different one. Or maybe this isn't the table for you.
Yep. Yeah, and I also, you know, like, as far as setting expectations, like, I've been fortunate in that, like, when you play with a lot of new players, they don't fully grasp what is, I guess, possible narratively in D&D. You know, like you've said, you don't want graphic violence involving children. I don't think it's occurred to most of the people I've DM'd for that they could murder children if they really wanted to. And so I kind of go under the, like, hey, would you see this in, like, a rated R movie, like, from Marvel? Like, if they wouldn't put it in, like the Deadpool movies, it's probably not going to be in my campaign.
Yeah.
Right?
That's fair.
You know, like, violence exists and that's fine. You are a bunch of murder hobos. But also, like, I'm not going to sit there and force an evening of ERPG on people.
I
I
actually had a really fun, well, I say it's fun, but it was actually kind of horrific experience with, like, the murder hobo thing recently, where my players kept knocking a guy out, like, over and over again with head trauma, and he just died.
Right, so this game's CTE.
Yeah, so he just died.
Yeah.
And it was not a pretty death, but yeah, like,
no, you got concussed to death.
But we had established that, like, that sort of engagement was something that we were cool with, right? Like,
definitely
having a character, like a non-player character, suffer from brain damage to the point that he dies is something that we're cool with at my table. It's not cool at everybody's table, and, like, a realistic depiction of that is definitely not cool at a lot of tables. And that's the sort of thing that you need to establish.
But also the other thing too is, like, you know, you need to understand that, like, these things might and should change as you go. Like, just because you established it in session 0 on, like, a theoretical doesn't mean that, like, the first day after you went through that, like, horrific waterboarding scene with your characters, everyone can't be like, hey, you know what, we actually don't want to do actual torture in this campaign. Right? Like,
session 0
and you
is
have to
a
be like,
document. Right, like,
all right, I'm gonna cut out my whole Guantanamo Bay section of this adventure, but
it's gonna be
like,
3 sessions, goddammit. 3 sessions of
gonna...
interrogation techniques. Advanced
yeah, exactly. Enhanced interrogation. Yeah.
But no, like your session 0 is a living document. Right, it's something that you're going to revisit. It's something that you're going to renegotiate. It's something that you need to check in on. Right, you need to do those occasional check-ins and see how your players are doing and reach out to them. So,
yeah, I mean, as much as we talk about how this game is collaborative storytelling or what have you, the reality is Dungeons and Dragons at a high level is relationship management, and
100%.
you have to be committed to the relationships between the players and the DM and each other, because these things, unlike another type of tabletop game where you have that sort of like containment to it, where it's like I show up, I played for an hour and a half, the game is over, I leave. I don't have to, there's going to be a lot more to manage that is a recurring thing, because of the nature of the game and the nature of the relationships. And again, you don't have that like, you're just my opponent for this week kind of relationship with the other players or with the DM,
Well, and it's like, it's something that you also have to read like in the moment too, right? Like you need to read the room, right?
Yeah.
Like, a good example of an absolute failure at this is, I don't know if you're familiar with Adam Cobell.
No.
Okay.
I'm very... listen, most of the people you bring up in regards to this kind of stuff, I have never heard of before, other than like the people who make the game. Because
that makes it really easy for me to tell stories.
Yeah, but I just don't interact with that kind of stuff out there, which I think like helps my tables because I don't come in with like weird baggage.
I have had weird baggage since like the 1990s, so it's so Adam Cobell, he worked on Dungeon World, which was the like D&D offshoot of Apocalypse World, and is honestly one of my favorite ways to play like a one-shot style D&D, right? Like it's got all of the trappings of the old school D&D experience, but it's a very modern system.
Okay.
Like it's got a lot of really interesting modern twists to the way that it actually like interacts with the players. So he shot to fame because he helped co-write that, and then he worked with Roll20 for a long time, the virtual tabletop people.
Yeah.
And he ended up becoming like the de facto game master. Like he was going to be their Brennan Lee Mulligan, right? He was like the face of the Roll20 actual play thing for a while.
Yeah.
And then just kind of out of nowhere in one session, he steamrolled a player character into a like weirdly sexualized repair and upgrade scene. Like they were playing a Warforged, and like the whole thing was like weirdly sexual around this upgrade, to the point where like the upgrade was inserted and the DM, like Adam Cobell, described it as being an orgasm. And this was on a live stream, right? Like this had an audience. And I have...
That's...
Yeah.
No.
And like you could... The thing that I found the most concerning about it is that Adam Cobell in this situation was laughing his ass off.
Oh.
Everybody else at the table was off the table. Right, like they elbows were not on the table. People were like sitting back. They were clearly uncomfortable. Everybody was taking up like a little less space.
Yeah, they like were physically retracting from what was happening in front of them.
Absolutely. And then everything about that program was canceled. Like the player who was forced into that situation announced that she was out. And then
no kidding.
Everybody else announced that they were also out. And then Adam Cobell, like he tried to work in role-playing games recently, and people found out that he was like the 37th name on a Kickstarter and flipped tables. So like, that guy's never going to work in the industry again because that is some scumbag shit. You can't be doing that.
Yeah, that's so bizarre. Like,
Yeah.
never mind like that. Like ERP is something that is like sketchy at the best of times and requires full buy-in from the group, but to like essentially like verbally sexually assault someone at your table.
That's exactly what it
Like
was.
that's yeah.
It was
That is
so gross.
wild.
So yeah, reading the room, right? Like being able to see read the body language of the players that you're playing with, right? Because like,
well,
you can be in that situation, and I have been in that situation where like I am describing a weirdly sexualized version of a normal situation, and everybody at the table is on the table, they're engaged, they're laughing with me. We're good to go.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? But if you're not reading that room and you see like one person is like off the table and looking really uncomfortable, that shit's got to go.
Well, and this comes back to what I was saying earlier, where it comes down to like the ability for someone to advocate for themselves and your responsibility as a DM to like build that communication gap. You know, you've mentioned something along the lines of a Nix system, which essentially is just bringing that communication barrier down to its like most minimal form. Like, I'm going to divert for a second here to talk about some experience I had in a previous career. I used to work in group homes with children who had high degrees of damage from fetal alcohol syndrome. The worst case that I had, I was assigned to this child because they had dislocated my friend's shoulder in a previous week. This kid he had extreme emotional control problems and spiraled badly. And what would happen is that he would find himself almost like in a feedback loop when it came to stimulus and unable to communicate his discomfort or his issue, to the point where they had to put him on a series of colored flashcards to indicate to him when his behavior was becoming a problem. And to a lesser extent, like, we need to sort of reduce communication to that level sometimes to give people the simplest out to say this situation isn't okay or I'm uncomfortable, like in a way that doesn't put that pressure of like I have to interrupt, my DM authority figure. I have to like disrupt the whole table. It's needs to be something as simple as like a flippable visual cue. I know you've got a few examples here of ways that you can do that.
Yeah, and actually, like I have seen that, like red cards. I've seen like red and yellow cards, right? So yellow cards are like starting to get uncomfortable, but like I'm gonna let you cook. And then red is like I am done with this particular topic of conversation. Please and thank you. And like they're small, they're subtle. All you got to do is like pick them up. And if you're sitting in the DM's seat, you're able to see it right away because you're scanning the table, right?
Yeah.
So the colored cards are really good for that. I've also seen just like an X on a piece of paper, right? Like you draw a big black X on a piece of paper and just flash that when you're done with this situation. And I've seen a couple of others. Like there was one table that I played with where they had a little bell. Yeah. And if things got weird, and like the bell literally never rang. There was never once during that campaign where somebody rang the bell. And honestly, I think that may have been both because I was playing that one really tame and because the bell brings a lot of attention to you. It's a little bit like the opposite of the intended of the intention for the flashcards. Is just like, I am currently announcing to everyone, ding-a-ling, we're done with this shit.
Yeah.
But like
one.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say one that I have seen is some fellas acquired. So there's a Have you been to a Brazilian steakhouse?
I'm vegetarian, Josh.
Oh, well, you weren't always.
I wasn't always, but no, I've never been to a Brazilian steakhouse.
So what they have are these little, essentially like coasters on the table, and they're dual-sided. And one side is green, and that means keep bringing the meat. And the other side is red, and that means I am done eating. Like, please stop putting meat on my plate.
Yeah.
But they're real simple, and they just acquired several of them, and they would just have those on the table in front of them.
Yep.
You know, as long as it was green, everyone's happy. If you were unhappy, you just flipped your coaster. That's it.
Well, and like I think it's worth mentioning that like these systems have very rarely been put into play on my tables. Right? Like that may be like a personal bias thing with like the people that I'm playing with and the like types of players and the types of situations that I deal with. But like I have had to deal with somebody flipping a red card at me maybe twice in my entire career.
Yeah.
Right. I have had to deal with somebody just telling me I need you to stop like a handful of times. And usually it's about like me making weird noises. Right? Like if I'm describing like crunching and like gross slurping noises,
okay,
that has occasionally like sent some of my players to some uncomfortable places. I think they call it like misophonia or something.
Okay.
Where it's like the exact opposite of ASMR, where like somebody's just like
right,
and you're just like, no, that's enough of that shit.
Odd.
Yeah.
I will say that is again very indicative of our different styles of DMing. I've never been carded, you know.
Okay.
And that's because I don't want to have that kind of game, if that makes sense.
All right.
I very much stay in the like, for the most part, this world is like PG-13 kind of high fantasy setting where like, you know, everyone's heroic. We're not going to get into weird nitty gritty details necessarily. I don't act as many things out. I will describe them in great detail if I feel it's necessary, but I don't inhabit horrific gurgling monsters the way you do.
That's fair. And like my genre selection is usually really broad. So like I've done a lot of horror games.
Yeah. I don't do any of that.
That's where you're going to see those cards more often, is when you're in horror.
Yeah.
It's like people get scared, they get uncomfortable. It's just like, cool. Please stop feasting on human flesh, you disgusting goblin.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about like what you shouldn't be doing, but I think one thing we need to address now is what you like should be doing, not just as a DM but as a player to help you know, create these spaces that are open. Mm-hmm. You know,
well, the first thing that I want to lay down there though is that like the power dynamics between players and DMs are very different. So like,
yeah,
when we say you should be open to things, as a DM, you have to be more open than your players have to be open.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a differential in the power and the responsibility that comes with those roles. But like anything that we're talking about is something that applies to both players and DMs. It's just it applies to DMs in a magnified way.
Yeah. You have to understand that, like, as the person at the head of the table, you have a microscope on you. And if you don't like that idea because you just don't think that you can adhere to certain standards, don't DM.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to have the spotlight on you. You really don't. You know, to a certain extent, there's even, like, online aids that can, you know, DM for a group that you can play in. But, like, you have to understand that you have a higher responsibility is not the right word, but there's more expected of you.
The rise of the professional DM is something that I think we need to talk about in a separate episode, but like it is weird to me how many people are like peddling DMing as a thing that they are going to get paid to do.
It's vulgar. It's narcissistic and vulgar, and I will argue about it for 2 hours.
Oh man, that guy that does the rules as written, like their holy gospel.
Oh, yeah, we gotta we gotta do a whole episode on rules as written.
Yeah, we're gonna tear that guy's website a new one. It's manifested. Anyway, things that you should be doing.
Anyways, yes. Yeah, so I brought this up with very vague wording because I didn't really know how to enunciate my thoughts. But the idea was, there's certain I don't know if I want to call them like philosophical or spiritual practices, but the idea of like selflessness and like grace at a table and forgiveness is really, really important. And the denial of like ego and self is like super, super, super necessary to be like conducive to a good like group. Like not just like, hey, I had a fun time playing D&D, but like I want to help facilitate this package of people that continue to produce cool, creative, fun experiences within the group.
It doesn't matter who you are at the table. You should be everybody else's cheerleader. Number one cheerleader.
Right.
You are there to support them and help them and create with them and give them what they need to be able to tell the stories that they want to tell.
Yeah. I mean, your character has a role to fill at the table, and hopefully someone else is being your cheerleader as well. Yeah. But your significance as a person or as a character is not diminished by the, exaltation of someone else for the moment.
Well, and it's ideally, when we see it expressed properly, when we see it expressed perfectly, everybody at the table is also your cheerleader.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, you are everybody's cheerleader. Everybody is your cheerleader. It's all for one, one for all. Right? And when it is your turn to take that spotlight, you can trust, because you've been giving all of this energy to the people that are around you, that they're going to give that back in the same way.
Yeah. I mean, it's the old biblical adage of give and it will be given to you. Mm-hmm. You are to be a giving player. You give other people their time to shine, and understand that like the successes and failures of the group come as a whole. Mm-hmm. This isn't the Josh show, this isn't the Chris show. The whole purpose of this campaign is not to like tell everyone what a badass I am and how cool I am that I defeated every elemental incarnation of dragon evil by myself, because that's just not possible. If that's what you want to do, write a book.
It also wouldn't be a very good book, to be fair.
No, you'd be reading yet another adventure of Dristord and the Perfect Night Elf or whatever. Like,
yeah,
like those books. The books where the one person can do no wrong suck. Mm-hmm. So understand that, like, think of all of your. Okay, let's think about Lord of the Rings for a minute. Mm-hmm. There are the reason that those books resonate so much with people is not because like Frodo is the perfect character and everyone loves Frodo and all the things he goes through.
That's Sam.
People have that is Sam. But people have different favorite characters in those books, and those characters all get their moment to shine. Like, it's not just, hey, Frodo managed to destroy the One Ring, what a cool guy he is. It's, hey, Sam managed to keep his best friend going when all hope seemed lost and is the real hero of the story. But also, like, Aragorn gets to, realize his destiny as the king of Gondor and, help repair the relationship with them and the Rohirrim, Gimli gets his chance to, like, actually make friends with an elf and is honored by the elves for being such a like noble and true person, even if he doesn't realize he's being honored, and like everyone's favorite character gets their moment, even if it's something as simple as like Boromir getting to die in battle honorably and sort of redeem himself. Like it's okay that characters get their chances because like the story of Frodo does not diminish the story of Gimli or Legolas or
one of the things
Strider, right?
One of the things that I love about it too is like if you look at the characters in that, they're actually really good role models for how you can approach your table, right? Because they are all each other's cheerleaders too, right? Like
right.
Even through like the rivalry between Gimli and Legolas. Right, they're still cheering for each other. It's a friendly competition, right? And they're still like Legolas is genuinely moved when Galadriel gives Gimli her hair, right?
Right.
Everybody is cheering Frodo on. Nobody wants Frodo to fail.
No,
right? Nobody wants Aragorn to fail. Nobody wants even Boromir to fail. And the fact that Boromir was the one who was tempted most keenly by the ring to begin with really only sets up the fact that these people all loved him.
Right,
and
right.
When they move on to other places and they meet his family, they bring that love with them.
Right.
They are absolutely the players you want to be.
Right. Yeah. So let's take a minute here to talk about the one rule to bind them all.
Which one is that?
That is Game Master Fiat.
Yeah. So, Dungeons and Dragons is a game that assumes, and not every role-playing game does this, but it assumes that the DM has authority over the shared imagined space. When there are questions about the shared imagined space, when there are conflicts that are happening in it, the DM is the one who decides what is actually happening in that space. And they are often likened to the god of D&D. They're the ones who are making the big decisions. And in game theory circles, we call that Game Master Fiat, which is the fact that one player around the table is able to make a decision that is binding.
They are the final authority. It is, quote-unquote, their table.
Yeah. But it's a privilege, right?
It is.
It is a privilege that is...
Heavy lies the crown.
Yeah. Just because you have the biggest say doesn't mean that you are the storyteller. It doesn't mean that this is your story. Your fiat is there to facilitate the stories of others.
Right.
And there's a responsibility to wearing that crown.
Yeah. You may... When I say it is your table, obviously it's not your narrative alone, but it is your, ecosystem to maintain.
Right.
You are the one ultimately responsible for keeping all of those positive things about the shared space going. And if you have to wield that sword heavily sometimes to do that, then you should. But, you should also, you shouldn't be wielding it, arbitrarily or randomly. You have to think about these things ahead of time, but you do also need to be willing to do it decisively and quickly. If someone has become uncomfortable in a situation, you need to shut it down quick.
And it needs to be fair and unbiased. And I think, coming back to what the story that started this, I think one of the things that I find most upsetting about this story is the fact that it was not fair and it was not unbiased. There was one
definitely.
player who was being favored over another. One player's backstory was facilitated through the butchering of another's. And that's not cool. That's not fair. And it removes trust. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody at that table can trust that DM to make a fair decision.
Yeah. Like, it is unfair to conspire with half of the table. It is unfair to arbitrarily make changes to the story because you don't like a selection that you let that person make.
Yeah.
It is unfair to dump a change to, like, the whole feel of the game onto someone without, like, any prior notice. There's so many ways that this was done in a, this can be done in a fair way.
Yeah.
I think that we've said that a few times tonight. Like, there are ways to make a twist like this happen in a fair way, but not communicating the twist is not fair. To, stories have twists, but they are fair twists in a good story.
Yeah.
They're set up. There's preamble. There's hints, and that's what makes them cool when you look back at them later. But everyone hates, like, an M. Night Shyamalan twist with no setup.
I think one of my favorite versions, the thing that this made me think of, and that this is kind of how I would adjust this scenario so that it would be more fair and it would be more interesting.
Yeah.
One of my favorite episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer involves a werewolf.
Yep.
And the werewolf is running around rampaging all through town, and there are a bunch of hints given for who the werewolf could be. And the twist is that it is a different character who got that from a bite that he received when visiting his little cousin. So he was hanging out with his 2-year-old cousin. His 2-year-old cousin bit him on the finger, and that was enough to give him lycanthropy. But to set that up,
okay,
you first had to, like, there was a notice of that event early in the story, right? They were talking about, like, what had happened over the weekend, and he, like, made a joke about how his little cousin Jordy had bit him, right? And that sets up later where he's talking on the phone after having woken up in shredded clothes. He's talking on the phone with his sister, and he's like, "Hey, so is Jordy a werewolf? So how long has that been happening?"
Yeah.
It's a good character reveal because you do have that, like, initial incident, right? Like, you have something that has happened that hints at what the actual problem is. You have the character waking up in, like, shredded clothes, not knowing where they are, rough sleep. They're, like, clearly tired. They're starting to act weird around specific times of, like, the month, right? And, like, you can build up to that reveal while also suggesting that the vampire is somebody else, so that twist has some impact.
Yeah. And, yeah, again, like, there was a clue. You might have thought it was a throwaway line, but that's on you. Yeah. It wasn't. That was a hint. Yeah.
And you don't change the backstory.
No.
Like,
no.
You leave the backstory as it is, and you have that initiating incident happen somewhere else in the story. Right? So when they're first in town for this, like, werewolf town shenanigans, right, you can absolutely have this character interact with somebody that bites them.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
little kids bite things all the time. I know.
Little kids bite things. Getting into a particularly scrappy sexual encounter with somebody. You don't have to describe it.
No.
Right?
Just say, the hooker left bite marks on your shoulder or whatever.
Yeah, like, you had a good night with the, like, barmaid that you seduced. And you've got, like, a couple of really pronounced hickeys. Right?
Yeah.
But that creates the thing that you can point to as the first hint of what happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you can start playing around with it. And then when that twist comes, now you have choices. Right? I think the thing that I'm most upset about with the events that are happening, right? The thing I'm most upset about with, like, the whole thing is changing the character's backstory without notice. That's some fucking bullshit. But in the events that are happening, the player doesn't have an opportunity to respond to those. Right?
Yeah,
it's now a fight to the death PvP. Right? You don't have an opportunity to deal with the fact that you're a lycanthrope. You don't have the opportunity to visit a cleric and maybe have that figured out, right? Like get a remove curse done, right? You don't have that great scene where you have your teammates chain you to something just to be sure.
Yeah.
Right? And then you turn into a werewolf and then you escape and oh shit. Right? Like there's so many fun things that you can play with this plot idea.
Well, there were so many opportunities to get buy-in from the player to this idea. Like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this, or even just like, hey, let's drop some hints. Like, hey, you notice, like, you know, that fork you picked up tingled.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Suddenly you have a rash, right? Like maybe you're allergic to silver. Like you haven't been allergic to silver before, but like that happens sometimes.
It can happen,
yeah. Or like have them shrug off other damage and not really mention it.
Yep.
Right? Like so many places where you can get that buy-in. So many places where you can like turn this into an engaging story and twist. And instead, they just decided that they wanted to assassinate this player character for reasons completely beyond her control.
Literal character assassination. Yeah. So I think we've sort of established that like this is all one giant written trust fall.
Yep.
And it's going to require an ass load of communication, and you are going to have to initiate a lot of it if you want it to be successful and in depth and honest. But you have to remember that these characters are not NPCs. They are real people. You can't change them. You can't control them, but you can get buy-in to interesting ideas as long as you've created the right framework within your table.
Hey, thanks for making it all the way through this episode of No Plot Only Lore. If you're looking for more, you can always find us at noplotonlylore.com and on all the very best podcast platforms. If you like what you heard today, please share, rate, and review the show to feed my never-ending need for attention and validation.